Good evening. I'm going to call the meeting to order. January 16th meeting of the Portsmouth City Planning Board. We have two members not present this evening, Mr. Coviello and Mr. Mahana, both traveling. Mr. Bowen, will you sit for Mr. Coviello?
I will.
First item on the agenda actually is election of officers. We need to elect a chair and a vice chair.
Mr. Chair, it's just a thought, but would it make more sense to wait till February to have the new board assembled to vote for your officers? It just...
It's a statutory requirement,
oh,
unfortunately.
it has to be in January?
Yeah.
Okay, just throw it out there.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Good idea.
It would make more sense, Jim.
Shall we call the legislature and see if we can get a special session right now? And
It's not going to happen, sorry. No. Considering we just changed it to do that.
Can anyone make a nomination?
anyone can make a
Okay,
nomination.
I would move to nominate Rick Chelman as chair.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. New vice chair.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to nominate Tony Coviello.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
That's what you get for not being here.
Yep. Absolutely. Classic. So approval of minutes. We have December 19th, 2024 minutes. Anybody have any comments on those? Modifications?
Move to approve the minutes of December 19th, 2024.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have determinations of completeness. Request of One Market Square LLC as owner for property at 121 15 Congress Street, requesting site plan approval to construct an addition onto the previously approved project at 1 Congress Street and the redevelopment of 15 Congress into a mixed-use building with associated site improvements. A parking conditional use permit from section 10.1112.14 of the zoning ordinance to allow 21 parking spaces where 53 are required. This property is in Assessor's Map 117, lots 20-15, and lies in Character District 5, Historic and Downtown Overlay Districts. Motion to accept is complete.
I make a motion that we vote to determine that item A is complete according to site plan review regulations, contingent on the granting of any required waivers under section 5 of the agenda, and to accept the application for consideration.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We have a series of public hearings. Just as everybody's a reminder, it's a public hearing. We have a presentation by the proponent, questions by planning board members, public comment, limited to comments to, for, and against the application. It's not open mic night. You have up to 3 rounds, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and 5 minutes. If you wish to speak in the second or third round, you must speak in the prior round of speaking. Then the public hearing is closed and we deliberate. The first item under public hearings is 635 Sagamore Development LLC as owner for property located at 635 Sagamore Avenue, requesting site plan review approval for demolition of existing structures and construction of 4 single-family dwellings with associated site improvements. This property is on Assessor's Map 222, Lot 19, and lies within the single residence or SRA district. I'll note that we still have not scheduled our site walk, which I believe this is contingent on before we take further action. Did folks get a chance to?
Do you want me to make a motion?
Sure.
Make a motion, vote to postpone the application to February 2025 meeting and schedule a site walk.
Second.
In discussion, I'd like to add, if we could add to that a date certain for the site walk, if we could possibly do it.
Sure.
Prior to February 20th?
If it would be possible to do it in January, that would be helpful for me. Or on the day of our next monthly meeting.
Of course, we will have 2 new members also, but, I mean, if folks don't know their schedules, we'll just have to do like we wanted to do, but the holidays sort of got in our way the last time.
Do you have some proposed dates?
I'm good really almost any time until, during January.
I don't think the afternoon of the meeting is a bad idea. We just want it to be light out, right?
Yeah, you kind of need to do it during the day when it's daylight
So
out.
it would have to be more like around 4 o'clock at the latest, I would think.
Cool. I was thinking more like 3:30.
That's probably a better time. Are
I
folks
can
available?
also
on
send out a poll if the board would like with.
We don't have to hold this up. I just wanted to, we didn't set it, and so it didn't happen.
Right.
Shall we shoot for the 20th of February, which is our next meeting? And
Oh, to do it right
Pete-
before the meeting?
Yeah.
Yeah, housing's on the 13th. Yeah, that works.
Yes. 20th work for folks?
Yep,
Okay,
20th?
20th. So
that afternoon.
you're going to amend your, in the afternoon, yeah.
I'll amend the motion to add that we will do a site walk at 3 PM on February 20th, 2025. Did I say it right?
You did.
Fine with me.
And did you amend? you
Second, agreed.
Seconded it, okay. We have a motion, second and amended. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. With the request of Durgan Square LLC as owner for property at 1600 Woodbury Avenue, requesting amended site plan approval for the addition of electric vehicle charging stations in the existing parking lot with associated equipment and transformer. Property is on Assessor's Map 238, Lot 16, and lies in the Gateway Corridor District. Are we combining this one?
Yes.
And I believe we'll consider combining this with the similar request by the same owner for property at 1600 Woodbury, requesting a conditional use permit for the approval of addition EV charging stations in the existing parking lot with associated equipment and transformer. And this property is again on Assessor's Map 238, Lot 16, in the Gateway Corridor or G1 District.
I would make a motion that we take old business item 4B and new business item 5A to be discussed together and voted on separately.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We have these matters together. Who is here to present this application?
Good evening. Dallas Pelland with SSC on behalf of AGI and IANA.
He'll bring it up. You should have one of these, and if you press the top button, you can highlight things if you need to.
So at this location at 1600 Durgan, we're proposing EV charging locations in the north corner of the parcel behind 1650 Woodbury, which is the existing bank. We've been working with the utility company on the cross path across Durgan Avenue for power to this location. At this time, all facilities with the utility can support the infrastructure. The landlord is on board. There is one minor change to this plan. The landlord with this parking lot is not opposed to, but he does not want to proceed with the canopies over the EV chargers. He would just like the EV chargers themselves. So before, if we have approval, before we go to BPEP, we would strip that stuff out of the plan sets and submit for permitting that way. Does anyone have any questions?
So it'll be the same plan, just no canopies over it.
Correct.
Questions of the applicant? None? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
I'm going to open the public hearing. Anybody here or on Zoom wishes to speak to, for, or against this application? Now is your time. Anybody on Zoom?
There are, but no hands have been raised, so.
If you're on Zoom and wish to speak to this application, raise your hand in the application on Zoom. And again, I assume nobody here physically present wishes to speak. If nobody on Zoom raises their hand right now, I'm going to close the public hearing. Close the public hearing.
No one else is. I will make a motion find that the site plan application meets the requirements set forth in the site plan regulations, section 10.9, evaluation criteria, and adopt the findings of fact as presented.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Before I make this motion, do we have to state in the motion that there won't be canopies since they were in the plans?
The finding of fact was amended, actually, as it should have been.
Oh, yeah, I didn't think about that then.
Well, that's just the findings of fact. I think you can do it in the site.
You can do it in the site plan, okay.
It can be it.
Okay. I will vote to grant amended site plan approval with the following conditions and just include in that we are of the understanding that they will be not constructing the canopies that are in the plans, so those will be adjusted accordingly.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
That's CUP.
Oh, did I miss something?
Over there to the other.
It's under item
Oh, yeah.
new business.
Hang on. Give me a minute. I'm almost there. You couldn't put them together for me, could you? Thank you. I would make a motion we vote to find the conditional use permit application meets requirements set forth in section 10.243 of the ordinance and adopt the findings of fact as presented.
Second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
And I make a motion we vote to grant the conditional use permit as presented.
Second. Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? You are approved.
Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is a request of One Market Square LLC as owner for property at 12115 Congress Street, requesting site plan approval to construct an addition onto the previously approved project at 1 Congress Street and redevelopment of 15 Congress into a mixed-use building with associated site improvements. A parking conditional use permit from section 10.1112.14 of the zoning ordinance to allow 21 parking spaces where 53 are required. This property is on Assessors Map 117, lots 12 to 15, and lies within Character District 5, Historic and Downtown Overlay Districts. Who is here to represent this application?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. John Shagnon from Haley Ward, representing the applicant on this application. With me tonight, project architect Tracy Kozak, project landscape architect Terrence Parker, and Mark McNabb is here, and he is the proponent. I'm going to probably be a little more long-winded than the previous representation, but after I speak, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy, and then she's going to turn it over to Terrence. She'll go through the architecture, he'll go through the landscaping, and then they'll turn it back to me to go through the staff memo. So as you mentioned, tax map 117, lots 12 and 14, and we have the cover page up. The property is, as you know, 1 through 15 Congress. It has frontage. The lot has and buildings have frontage on High and Fleet Streets. The project is in the CD4 and CD5 zones. And no, you can stay on that page. So the project extent is in the gray, and the line here is the line CD4, CD5 line. Just to reiterate, as we go forward, the project is going to be clear, the buildings that are proposed, the addition to 1 Congress, is going to be separated from the J.J. Newberry building by space. So, continuing on, 1 Congress was approved in February of 2023 by this board, the 1 Congress Street project, and that we are calling 1 Market Square. We're adding the J.J. Newberry building to this site plan application. We also have a parking CUP application before you for 19 spaces where 53 are required. Moving to the next plan, this shows a lot line relocation. The colors aren't showing up too well, but the area by the High Hanover parking garage is going to be deeded to the city of Portsmouth, And this area here, which is a part of the existing Haven Court, will be deeded to One Market Square LLC. The next page shows, oh, there's the color, sorry. The red goes to the city, the blue goes to One Market Square LLC. Then we have a next page, existing conditions, next page, an ortho photo, next page, a demolition plan. So in this plan, it shows the demolition required for the project. The rear wood frame part of the One Congress building will be removed, and the parking lot that exists behind there will be removed and put underground. The next page shows the zoning and height requirements. You can see again, the CD4, CD5 zone line, and then varying height requirements based on portions of the street frontage. This plan also has proposal information. We're proposing 40 dwelling units with a total of 84 bedrooms at this time. Info in your packet regarding the residential density and desired residential densities of the future are in your package. Also, restaurant and retail uses are proposed for this site. Next page is the site plan. It shows the intent of the project. The developer is going to lower Haven Court, rename it Newbury Way, and make it a at-grade pedestrian-friendly corridor to enliven the back. The developer has purchased the adjacent lot, known as the Gillies lot, and that allows us to expand and complete this pedestrian corridor at a full width the entire way to Fleet Street. On High Street and Ladd Street, the curbs will be lowered to provide for a pedestrian-friendly, at-grade environment across the whole street. The addition is shown here, One Congress addition. Again, it will not touch the Newbury building. There is an entrance off of this Newbury Way corridor and a main entrance off of High Street. On the J.J. Newbury building, the grade is lowered, which allows the development to add some storefronts and create a pedestrian-friendly, accessible building on that side. And last but not least, this alleyway off of Fleet Street is going to be redone. The J.J. Newbury building has office use on the upper floors. That's going to be converted to residential. There will be rooftop access on the J.J. Newbury building included. Vehicular circulation remains as it is now. There will be access, though, up a portion of Newbury Way to access the lower level parking that is in this building addition. But the intent of the rest of it is pedestrian only, except for maintenance and emergency vehicles. In your packet is a memo from GPI. It's a technical memorandum discussing the project's impact on traffic. There's discussions of the trip generations and parking rates. The report concludes that there's an increase of 18 vehicle trips on Saturday midday, but there's a peak net reduction in daily trips during the weekday AM and PM peak hour. That's a part of your package. The Portsmouth zoning requires 32 spaces. In that memorandum, they also discuss the ITE trip rates, and those are a little bit lower at 28 spaces. No parking is required for the non-residential uses. The developer is going to fund off-site improvements on Ladd and High Streets in addition to Newbury Way. And on August 21st of 2023, the City Council authorized a memorandum of understanding for this work, and copies are included in the packet. Lighting, artwork and off-site, those are off-site, in the streets. Also, landscaping on-site will be covered later in this presentation. Currently, the only landscaping is on the edge of that parking lot off High Street in the back. Water and sewer upgrades are a part of the off-site improvements that will allow for connecting these buildings to those infrastructure facilities. Included in the plans are grading and drainage. So if we can run through the next packet of sheets up to the last profile, which is 203. Right here, I'll just talk briefly. Stormwater management is detailed in a stormwater analysis, which is a part of your package. So we've looked at that, how we're going to deal with stormwater. Solid waste, we're going to work with the city to relocate a solid waste facility to a portion of the parking garage. And it's not a portion of the garage that is underneath the roof that people park in. It's to the left of that. It's an area that is used primarily for storage currently. There's no parking in there. So no parking is lost in that. I'm going to turn it over to Tracy Kozak, and she's going to review the architecture, which starts on the next page, then Terrence, and then I'll return for a wrap-up and questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Board and Department. Tracy Kozak, Arcove Architects. I'll just briefly bring you through the different levels and elevations of the building and kind of tell you what we're thinking of for program and layout and use of the spaces. This is the basement level. This is all underground. To the right, the One Congress building is parking. The little tooth hanging down to the lower right is the existing basement underneath some retail fronting on Congress Street. That would be storage, utility rooms to the back. The left portion of the basement on that page is it's underneath the existing Newberry's building. That whole block was built in different periods of time over several centuries, and so the basements underneath this building are in different levels, different shapes. Some of them connect, some of them don't. There will be a little bit of excavation under there to even that all out, so the floors are level and the rooms connect, but that basement level will be primarily sports spaces, utility rooms. There will be some bathrooms, some laundry, and a proposed dining space for snacks and whatnot for people who might live upstairs. Okay. So this is first floor at grade. To the right, the One Congress building. As you previously saw a couple of years ago, no changes. It's all retail. To the left, pretty much the same restaurant and retail as it is now, with the exception to the far left fronting Fleet Street, currently office. We propose that would become retail. And as John mentioned, with the lowering of the grade at Haven Court to the top of the page, we can also introduce more storefronts and entrances into the building all along Haven Court. Second floor, it's all housing. Currently, the second floor is all office. The upper right corner of that plan is currently the parking lot. That is the only new construction. Everything else is existing building that's renovated. Same story on the third floor. The fourth floor, there's only a fourth floor, and it's really an attic on the One Congress side to the right. To the left is roof, green roof, solar panel array, and mechanical space. The only addition on the Newberry's property is along Haven Court. We are bringing up an elevator, stair tower, and a small lounge area, and there will be another fire stair to the lower left. Roof plan from above. Both parcels have solar arrays, rooftop mechanical. And the elevations, I'm sure you know this has been recently approved by HDC. This on the top is Congress Street. These are existing buildings, and to the right is 1 Congress and 3 Congress. Then there's that missing tooth, which is not part of this property. It's where the works is now. And then to the left, where you see kind of the bright red building, that is part of this project. There is a restoration of that facade back to the first building. So there were 4 buildings over time on that particular site. Before we had records, it was a wooden house, part of the Bell Tavern, which was very popular up until it burned down in the 1770s. And then there was the first brick building, which we are restoring here. Parts of it are still there. Most of it is gone. That burned down again in the 1860s. It was rebuilt. Then it burned down in the 1950s and was what you see now. So HCC was pleased to see us restore it to a more authentic, holistic approach. On the left, this is our building. It's the south side of the Newbury's building in that little alley. So it's really hard to see unless you walk down that alley. But we are proposing to make that also pedestrian friendly with storefronts and lighting and pavers. So those would be residential units looking down into the alley, which will improve safety. And on the bottom, that drawing is Fleet Street, pretty much like it is now, with some updates to some of the spandrel cladding between the windows, and we are adding some awnings over the storefront windows and lowering the windowsills to make them more pedestrian friendly. Again, we're turning it from office to retail. Okay, next page, please. And this is that. Okay, so the top drawing is Haven Court, Newbury Way. To the left is the 1 Congress project as previously approved. The only difference, there are two only differences. One is that we're lowering the grade of Haven Court, so the storefronts to the right of the parking garage door, the windowsills get a little bit lower. And the space in between the 2 buildings, in between the Newbury building and 1 Congress, you see a little bit of a stair tower extension. That is set back from Newbury Way by about 20 feet or so. That is stair access to the roof, as we are required for life safety. There's an elevator back there, and that would be a primary entrance as well. The bottom drawing is High Street as previously approved. No changes. The next page. Aerial view from Fleet Street, and the Newbury's buildings in the front and 1 Congress towards the back. You can see part of it is green roof for residents only. It's not open to the public. And to the right is the solar panel array, and behind that are mechanical units serving the building. And some eye-level, street-level views of the different pedestrian ways, showing how we're enhancing the storefronts and providing pedestrian amenities such as lighting and landscaping along the way, which is a perfect segue to, which I think is our next drawing, which is landscape site design with Terrence Parker.
Thank you, Tracy.
Good evening, Chairman and planning members. My name is Terrence Parker from Terra Firma Landscape Architecture. On this image, you can see the conversion of Newbury Way into a pedestrian alley. And if you scroll around there, Peter, to
I'm trying.
overall
It's
plan.
being difficult here.
I'm having the same problem. I think
Yeah,
it keeps
it's crashing
freezing up
for
on the
me.
pictures.
Stuck. So if you recall, the whole concept of the conversion of the Newbury Way to a pedestrian mall was to link from the McIntyre lot through Commercial Alley onto Ladd Street, down Newbury Way, and onto Fleet Street, and with hope eventually over to the Worth parking lot. So there's a lot of
there's a lot of beautiful amenities in this site. You're still stuck there, right, Peter?
Yes.
Okay. There's a lot of beautiful amenities on the plan here, starting on Ladd Street and Hyde Street. Those streets will be similar to Chestnut Street, where the grade was raised to, on Chestnut Street, the grade was raised to make it level with the sidewalk, so there's no apparent sidewalk. This way, and on this project, we're going to raise the road to be equal to the sidewalk, so it'll be seamless movement between across the zone of the High Street and Ladd Street, and it'll be, unlike Chestnut Street, it'll have beautiful stone paving that will vary in shades of gray and darker gray, which you can see on the plan there. And both Ladd Street and Hyde Street will have the catenary lights. There'll be diameter discs, different diameters that will move, and there's a photometric plan for those lights. So those will go up High Street from Congress and then over to Ladd, from Ladd Street over to Market Street. So if you recall, Newbury Way was, this has been going on for a couple of years, so I think I've said this before, but we've taken the concept of a labyrinth and stretched it into a linear form, so it becomes a mindfulness walk. And so that's going to be done with poured concrete, so it'll be one tone of red and then a tone of gray in there. So that corridor, that pedestrian way, will be filled with plant materials and stone benches, much like you see in the Chestnut Street area across from the music hall. There's one down at Fleet Street, and then there's two at the upper level. And to repeat what Tracy and John just said, some time ago we had this series of stairs. If you recall, the Gillies was 14 feet below the top of Newbury Haven Court, which is Newbury Way. But so Mark is going to lower that so it's on level from Fleet Street over to Ladd Street. It's going to be pitched at a ADA accessible pitch. So no longer do we have the stairs and the handrails that were needed to get people from Fleet Street up to the top of Haven Court. So because that's lowered, it, as Tracy said, it exposes that side to the animation of retail shops, and it's on grade. We still have an iron arch on the Fleet intersect where the Fleet sidewalk meets the Newbury Way area, and there's a sitting area, a sitting stone area right there, and there's all plantings that separate what is now the Gillies parking lot from the Newbury Way. So that's that plan, and you can see the colored pavement on High Street over there, and so you can see in that red that's the mindfulness walk. And so you may also recall that this plan has also been to the Park Committee, and so there's sculptures on both the northwest side that faces the Gilly parking lot and on the southwest side that is kind of across from the Franklin Oyster House, that small alley. So there's a glass sculpture on that side and there's a bronze sculpture on the other side. So there's an abundance of pedestrian amenities in this plan that really is, you can only see that on the Hearth project. So it's really generous, I think, to incorporate these elements into this plan. The only other thing I'd like to mention is that the Park Committee wanted us to extend that mindfulness walk that we have on Newbury Way onto that little alley on the south side of the back of Newbury's that's across from the Franklin Oyster House. So there's a articulated paving pattern in there, and that glass sculpture will have also illuminate the alley, and there'll also be the catenary lights in that space as well. So if you have any questions, I can answer them later, but at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to John Shagnon.
Thank you, Terrence.
So the project went to the Technical Advisory Committee on December 3rd. It was reviewed and it recommended approval here. Again, there's one change that it's kind of hard to see, but the buildings will be separated, and that will make the back addition a little bit smaller, but the buildings will be two separate buildings and not attached. The staff memo talked about that being the resolution of the building size, if it was attached, being something that was needed to be addressed before you went to the next stage. So that's how we're addressing it. That was one of the ways we could address it. And so the staff memo mentions that there would be 2.1 to 2.4 as conditions. Those conditions are acceptable to the applicant. We do want to point out 2.2 talks about review and approval of off-site areas. And I was just informed that potentially the trash portion of the project may be located somewhere on the Gillies lot, which might eliminate the need for that IAM or parking garage. But that, I think, folds right into that 2.2, because that's an off-site improvement. So we would ask that the board consider this project and approve it with these mentioned conditions. And we're all here. We're glad to answer any questions you have about the project. That concludes our presentation.
Questions of the applicant team? Bill. Then Andrew. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll lead, thanks. Project has a lot to commend itself, and particularly all the cooperative agreements that have been reached with the city. My questions are about parking, and I'd like to better understand the implications of the parking that you're talking about. In the different manifestations of our paperwork, it's portrayed a little different in different places. So I'd like to use the report of Greenman Pedersen as a baseline for understanding what the parking implications are. For those who are searching for it, it's on page 415 of our materials for tonight. There are 53 spaces required by code, if I understand properly, parking spaces.
Correct.
And there's a...
Under the Portsmouth ordinance, yeah.
Excuse me?
Under the Portsmouth ordinance.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's where we are, right?
Yeah.
So of that, there's a 21 underground parking spot in what's a portion of the prior approved project.
And will be in this project, too.
Right. And that 21 replaces what was previously a privately owned surface lot with about 20 spaces?
I would have to count them, but it's roughly the same space. So I believe the initial application was 19 spaces. And in this redo, it's 21 in the garage level.
So essentially, there's no incremental parking.
So go ahead, Grace.
There will be a net increase in parking of 2 spaces compared to what's there now.
Okay, so
For one Congress.
Well, for both, JJ Newberry's has no parking. Yeah.
if you view both projects together, there's 21 being built underground, and there's 20 or so going away that are above ground.
19.
And there are 5 spaces on High Street that are going away as a result of High Street being widened.
I can speak to that, yeah. So the 5 spaces on, the 5 spaces on High Street present they would be going away. The short answer is yes. And in the process of working through the approvals, the fire department indicated that they because of the curbing and the parking spaces, they consider those 5 spaces to be dangerous because of the restricted access for apparatus.
So to the extent that the question is before us is how much judgment we apply to whether this project will increase the demand on parking in the downtown area as compared to what it was a year ago, we will have something like 5 or 6 fewer spaces available, and by city ordinance, 53 spaces more requirement.
So I think
Is
there's
that
only.
a fair interpretation?
Well, that interpretation needs to be adjusted a little bit. I believe I counted them a couple of times. I think there's 18 or 19 spaces currently in that surface lot.
Yeah.
And then recently, the city had done a pilot where they created 4 new spaces in Market Square. So in general, there will be less of a decrease than what you're talking about. Yes. Yeah.
John, would you guys like a couple of minutes to sketch out a tally while there are other questions, if there are other questions sort of non-related to parking?
Well,
Do you want to keep going? I don't want to stop you, but it
Sure.
seemed like you might want to, are you
I
okay?
was just reminded of the spaces that got moved into Market Square,
Okay.
which I just talked
Okay.
about. So I believe those are 4. So the 5 on High Street turned into 4 in Market Square. There used to be a bus pull-off.
Ah.
And it turned out that the transportation entities didn't use that anymore. I think it was primarily for the interstate buses, which got moved around to the other side of the garage. So it was just the coast bus, and they just pull up to the kiosk because the street's wide enough.
So it's a wash on parking, give or take 1 or 2,
Yeah.
and an increase of 53 required for the proposal. If you-
Because of the, and a lot of that is the conversion, though, of the buildings to residential, where there's office in JJ Newbury now, and it's being converted to residential, that creates the parking,
Right.
parking demand. The demand was there for the office, and the GPI study talks about that there's, from a trip generation standpoint, which is kind of tied to parking, the weekday AM and PM peak hours generate less traffic, so.
And if you took the next step of co-living as opposed to the larger units, how many units were there to be in co-living?
I don't know if we want to speculate at this point. Your point is that would be more needed parking? Is that where you're going with that?
I'm thinking it might be a requirement of 100.
100 spaces?
This feels like speculation.
I don't
Let's,
know that that's germane to
yeah, let's
this
stick,
application here
let's stick
tonight.
with what's been presented for tonight. There's a co-living conversation that's going to happen later in the evening, but it's related to amendment, not,
Not what's before you tonight. so.
right. Yeah, you,
Thank you.
okay. Andrew?
Can you speak to the logistics of things like the cars queuing on Haven Court, or the car elevator specifically, as well as logistics for deliveries, trash, and how Haven, or what is being renamed as Newberry Way, how the logistics of that is anticipated for all of that travel?
Sure. I don't know if if we can go back to the site plan, Peter?
Yep.
Currently, the delivery area for the JJ Newbury building is this back corner, and delivery trucks come down, turn in here, and then they back up to this area. So you can see that the garage entrance is deliberately short of the space needed for that truck to sit there to make a delivery. The amount of traffic volume that will be going to the garage, where there's only 21 spaces, is such that it is wide enough for 2 cars to pass, so there will be some cars that need to potentially wait for another car to either be brought up or to go down. And just as There have been lights and other types of signaling on other projects downtown. There would be the same thing here.
But they physically cannot utilize the elevator until it is available to them. With the other projects that I think you're mentioning, those cars can pass.
That's true, but the volume of and need for access where there's parking spaces for the people that, it's not public parking, so it's only the people that are residents there. And the frequency is such that, yes, some people might need to wait, but that's a part of their understanding as they live there.
It is not so much those folks that I am concerned about. It is the confliction of uses between the pedestrian space, loading space, and car access. And so would you agree that that congestion point or that bottleneck of sorts can be troublesome?
No.
Can you explain that to me?
Sure. So you have a situation currently on Chestnut Street where it is open to car traffic, and there are events that happen there at the music hall where there are 100 people waiting in line. So it hasn't presented itself, in my understanding, as a huge problem. It's something that you deal with in the city. This is not Market Street, light traffic. It's a back pedestrian area, so they will just need to get along, and I think they can. It's slow travel speeds.
And then my other question was to retail space number 5.
I think, sorry, Mark might want to opine.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, I'll field that question on deliveries. I think there's a little confusion on what's happening right now. The only thing that delivers in the back of J.J. Newberry is for Thirsty Moose. The rest of J.J. Newberry gets deliveries on people in there, the office, Trace Diana, that are loading zones in Congress Street, they deliver in the front. Fleet Street, they deliver in the front. The nice thing about this property, we have loading zones and frontage on every street. So the reality is going to be the use to actually have loading zones and delivery down Newberry Way will not be there. We will redirect the limited deliveries that Thirsty Moose had to their front, which has loading zones and which is more appropriate. But right now, today, that's all that got delivered back there was just the beer kegs and the daily food, or couple daily food to Thirsty Moose. It was not for the whole 65,000 square foot J.J. Newberry. So when we go this route, all we're going to have on Newberry Way, all we're going to allow the tenants to deliver on Newberry Way is just the cars into the garage. The rest of that is all going to be from loading zones and entryways that are already on Fleet, already on Congress Street, or on High Street, which will have a loading zone at the end as well. That's where the deliveries will come. We won't allow any of our tenants to have deliveries down Haven Court.
So that includes the newly created retail?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
8, 6, 7 in the rear, and then retail space 5.
Picture it like all of downtown. That would get delivered with, they'd have on a storefront. Trucks would pull over.
Yes.
They'd bring it down like we see everywhere else. We wouldn't let them navigate through landscaping and pedestrian ways
Sure.
For that kind of limited delivery when there's ways to do it on Fleet Street, High Street, and Congress Street.
And then 2 more questions, specifically on retail access to retail space number 5, which is on the rear side, so Haven Court side. There's no door on the Haven Court side. It's through what looks like a vestibule.
Correct.
Was there an intent to that?
I think the intent was to just eliminate another step stoop outside and have it more of a friendly feel off a lobby. Okay. That was really the only intent.
And then, as it relates to trash pickup and things of that nature, was there?
Yeah, trash. We're working with the city to do a comprehensive plan in the High Hanover garage. We had to have a plan B in case there's something wrong with that. Something could happen. You know, the council may not approve it. may not meet codes on something. So part of purchasing Gillies, which we own now, is that we have all our trash met on Gillies. Dumpsters will be on Gillies. So we can meet our trash, our solid waste trash, any option. If we don't have it in the High Hanover, which we like that solution, we have it today with Gillies.
Understood. And I guess my last point is more global. It's to the narrative behind the parking, and having just come from a housing committee meeting where, yes, having a higher parking ratio and parking requirement generally increases someone's cost basis for development, which I can understand, but notwithstanding, we are facing a parking crunch. And as long as it snows in this state, I think people will want cars. And as much as people rent apartments, they always ask about parking pretty much first thing. So with that said, your parking narrative goes on to speak about restaurants, shopping, and entertainment, but it doesn't really acknowledge grocery or pharmacy or really relevant and necessary needs within the downtown corridor. And obviously, we can't predict what's going to happen in the future. If we have a grocery store downtown, great. But to that end, we don't have one right now. And so it has been my experience in the past that tenants are always asking for parking, and unless that is solved or provided for, they're going to be scrambling for a parking space. And so beyond a parking garage, what is the next solution to that I can think of justifiably in my head to eliminate 50 parking spaces effectively?
Well, again, this is a philosophical question. We're really talking a concept that applies to suburbia and not downtown. Our 400-year-old downtown, our downtown that was separated back to Glebe separation of church and state on the lots. 80% of the lots downtown either are built on the lot line or have no meaningful land to have parking. We have a built-in hardship downtown for parking. J.J. Newberry's built on the lot line. It can't produce parking. So that question is a very good question, but I think that the thing that gets missed constantly on that question is, what do you want to have happen downtown? Demolish historic buildings? Just go snap and it will come up like it would in a mall? So I think that what we have understood over my entire 40-year career is the reason the city has invested so heavily in parking, has a fee structure, and we pay dearly for it, is the city is in the parking business. And I could not produce a leach field, a well, or a parking space any differently. So I think it's very important to understand what we're talking about downtown. Downtown was subdivided before a car was even thought about. So these uses that go from a higher demand for automobile, like office is a higher demand, restaurants are a higher demand. When we go to residential, we kind of forget about talking about how many spaces are being eliminated. It's just we talk about like as if it was zero before, and now there's this additional amount. So actually the narrative is that there is a reduction in parking in going in this use. You can get into nuances. You can say, oh, but it's an apartment and they have to park at night. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of spaces at night. We see it all the time that are available. So it's a much deeper conversation. If we had the ability downtown, we hired an intern who studied every property downtown. And 95% of the properties downtown do not conform to the parking required in your zoning ordinance. When you have something like that, you have a built-in hardship.
Well, I appreciate that, and I can...
Can't do anything about parking. So your answer is, I can't do anything about it.
Sure, but what is not philosophical is a zoning ordinance and a planning department, and also the constituents that we are hoping to serve. And so the matter of fact is that, yes, 95% of properties downtown may be non-conforming, but we do not want to further perpetuate this issue by adding another 50 some odd cars. And so my broad stroke question here is, how do we answer to the general public who perceives this as a further burden, whether it's on their taxes, on their opportunities to park, or on their kind of safety,
Well,
comfort, and convenience?
The answer to that is that the city of Portsmouth, on the tax issue, the city of Portsmouth makes money on parking. The residents and the taxpayers do not fund parking. It's a net positive to the general fund. So that's the answer to parking on the tax issue. In terms of the issue on, we're going to a use that has less parking than is today. And it's not the other way around. And so the answer is these old historic buildings, a city has to make a decision, what use they want to see. And if a use isn't possible, which office space in this type of situation isn't, I really only have one use I can do, and that's residential. So mine is really either empty or residential on the upper floors.
Is office not possible because it's not economical?
Yeah, there's just no demand. I mean, it's just.
But an economic hardship is not something that we are considering.
That's all right then, it will be empty. So you'll have to vote the way you have to vote on it. I can only answer it with the actual facts, which are the upper floors of these buildings that have old office space. That building has old office space upstairs. It would have to be completely renovated for new office space because it's so aged, and there isn't a demand for that. So we're proposing to convert it to residential. We're hoping the planning board will get co-living because we would like to see a lot more density in it. We have requested all along that the co-living zone not require parking. So, in that instance, we would hope a co-living zone comes along and it would not have a parking requirement, just like you don't downtown for your highest uses, a restaurant, an office space. We don't have a parking requirement for that. And it's the highest use we have. So I think the answer to constituents listening about parking is to understand that retail and restaurants and offices require and use more parking than residential does, and we don't require them to have anything. And when you take a space that's one of those uses and go to residential, you're actually freeing up more spaces. It's less of a demand. So that's the answer to your question, is that it's a less of a demand than what was there. And we're doing what you hardly see anybody do. How many developments downtown put a parking garage under their building? So that end is, what we're doing is the most we can do. We can't build a parking garage there, can't demolish J.J. Newberry. So I think the answer is it's a positive move on taxes because parking's paid for, and it's less parking than what the current use requires.
I don't wholly disagree, and I want you to know that, and I want to, again, give this the
Microphone.
give this the opportunity that it demands because of all the other offsite improvements and the general improvement that you're doing to the historic building. So that is really important for me to say. It's just a function of how this is laid out logistically, as we talked about, and on top of that, what is commonly the headline problem in downtown area. So I, again, appreciate your points, and that's all I got.
Okay, thank you.
I want to talk about something that's not parking.
Me or John?
I'm only gonna
I
come
think
back to
Tracy,
it.
actually. Believe it or not, I'm going a different direction. So in looking at the basement level of the J.J. Newberry building, you have that whole corridor of storage and uses, but then there's that whole side to the left that's got just a little bit in the corner of sprinkler storage and a staircase. So I'm just curious about what's going on with the rest of that blank space. Is it usable, not usable? That's my
It's
curiosity.
existing. It's the only change we're making there is to move the stair that goes from the first floor to the basement. We're moving it from the left to the right, but otherwise it's there. There's a sprinkler entrance room there, and there's an electric room, and that's it.
But is the rest of it usable or not usable?
It's too small. It's
too
literally a stair and a sprinkler room and an electric room. It's
Okay. So the rest is really no actual.
yeah, and then everything around it we believe is not excavated. It's all just Yeah, that's Hill.
I was curious because
Sure.
it's sort of this big blank space on a page.
Yep.
Gotta ask.
Yep, that's Rock.
Yeah. While Tracy's up there, I want to acknowledge the work of the architects and the designs that I'm seeing here, and also acknowledge that this project does solve some things that are, characteristic of that area. There's an encroachment and so forth. But I am going to come back to parking because this is the request that's being made tonight, and I don't know if Tracy wants to be on the hot seat for a parking question or not, or if Mark or John will answer. But it's pretty much, it's a direct question that builds upon what's been asked here already. And what I'd like to know is there a solution within the project footprint or contractually somewhere nearby where you could provide the required number of parking spaces? Not the 28 that I believe was in the study, but the 53, I believe, was the calculation. Is that possible to provide that through some creative design of the project itself or somewhere close by in Portsmouth through a contractual arrangement?
Oh, through adjacent, like neighboring sites and whatnot?
Like anywhere, I guess, can we provide those parking spaces?
The answer is no. There is a parking garage that's in close proximity to this site that the city created to.
Which would be, not part of what I'm asking.
You're asking about, I
Can you
don't know what you're
provide-
asking
can you
about.
provide-
The city provides parking as a part of what the city does.
Yeah,
And-
John, what I really just want to know is,
No, the answer is no.
you can't, right?
No, correct.
Okay. That's all I
Okay.
ask.
Yes, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that I remain in full support of the project, and I'm not trying to back into my support and discount the parking concerns. I happen to agree wholeheartedly with the parking philosophy the applicant has made. I really do. As it relates to the urban core of our city, he even alluded to the fact that at one point, cars were introduced into this area. Can you imagine? I mean, there were no cars allowed. When J.J. Newberry was built, imagine the parking demand as a department store that created. And, I mean, the building as it exists, I'm talking about the existing building, obviously, and then even when the restaurant at One Congress existed, there's been this need for parking, and it's managed, it's worked. And even to this day, for those of us who spend our entire lives in the core, it works. We don't find ourselves with nowhere to go. It's working, and I don't think when you consider the amount of parking activity that is occurring at these sites right now, we do have to remember we're simply changing the building. The amount of parking, it's negligible. It's the activity around it is going to remain the same. It's going to organically work. And it is very true that the city is in a parking business. We build parking garages, and it does generate revenue. And it's been discussed publicly many times that we should start to consider our third garage, and that's what cities do. And I think that this is how it will play out, not just for this application, but for many applications in the core of the city. The last thing we want is for all of these developments to provide 100% of the required parking. No one would like the look of that or the feel of that. When you consider requests that we hear made whenever polls are taken, whether it's Portsmouth Listens or a kiosk in Market Square Day, the number one request over and over again, whether it's realistic or not, is more pedestrian passages. Close Market Street to vehicles. We hear that all the time. No vehicles in Market Square. Well, that may not be realistic, but I'm imagining this as an extension of Commercial Alley, that feel, where you don't care what the cars do. This is about the pedestrian. It's about, and it's also ADA accessible. It's intensely pedestrian friendly and improving. And this is what the community has been asking for in the core for many, many years. So I don't want that to go unrecognized over parking spaces. I mean, cars should be secondary or tertiary in the core. We don't want full compliance for parking in the core. It's the way it's written now, that is. It would be so vehicle intensive that it would be an awful experience, to be honest.
Bill?
I'd like to ask Mark to pick up a little bit on your philosophical question and give me a little bit of grace here. It's not rational economically or architecturally to require each individual property to provide its own parking. It distorts the architecture, and it is not the most cost-effective way to do that. The most cost-effective way to do that is to centralize parking in a convenient place and then let each property be what the property should be. But we're in a situation where that isn't the modus that we operate on. So one thought, which I think legally we cannot do, is to have an impact fee on developers to apply to parking and to have that go into a fund that would create parking and let each developer do what they will with their property. I think we cannot do that legally. I'm not positive. Do you have any other thoughts as to how to get out of this conundrum that we have a structure that forces us into architecture that isn't either cost-effective or the most beautiful way of doing things?
I can appreciate your question to keep teasing it out, to, figure out and make sure that what you're doing is responsible. The 40 years I've been here, parking's been handled many different ways downtown. There was a period we did pay an impact fee, by the way. The city raised $1.2 million. During that period of time, I happened to pay $500,000 of it. I think the funds were used for the modern kiosks we see. What didn't raise enough to create a parking facility. And then the city decided to eliminate that approach for a variety of reasons. The longest time what it was downtown was the philosophical and correct way to do it, was if you were moving further away, less demand, they calculated what the parking was in every building existing. And if you had a use that was less parking, you didn't have to do anything. And residential was always less than restaurants, retail, and office by parking calcs. So for the longest time, we didn't have to do any parking. Then all of a sudden, somehow, something got passed around 2015 that has what we have now, which is we'll take the least parking demand use we have downtown, residential, and let's make them have parking. Now, so this is still staying with your philosophical question. So however that kind of decision was arrived at, we could talk at length about that. There's a lot of places in the zoning ordinance that have this similar logic. But however that got arrived at, that's what got arrived at. But what it misses, and what the philosophical question is that's important to understand, is we do not allow demolition of historic buildings. There's nothing you can do. J.J. Newberry, that's built on the lot line, it's older than a car was here, is a perfect applicant for a variance. It's a perfect applicant for a variance. I can't do anything. So that used to be then how we did it. But then everybody got upset because the ZBA would just always give variances. It's not that they always give variances, it's because all these buildings had hardship. So then the city decided, well, let's do a CUP, come to the planning board. But it's that same system, downtown, historic buildings that can't produce parking. So I encouraged the planning board to change the ordinances and name it. We have a good problem downtown. We have historic buildings people want, and we have people paying for parking that we profit from. I encouraged the planning board to get rid of all parking requirements downtown. We can't produce parking, or allow us to demolish historic buildings. But again, that's why the HDC came into place, because what you have are like those parking lots now on State Street from the banks. People don't want that. So this is something that we may miss each other on, but I'm fairly firm in my career when an area has a development pattern that's predominantly one way, that is the use for that area. In downtown, these lots can't produce parking. And it creates a real expensive hardship on property owners and on boards to review stuff downtown when all the applicants come in the same way and they grovel for a parking CUP when they have buildings that are older than cars and they can't demolish them. You know, and then you hear, well, you're just in a no-win situation. So the answer is really, the city had to make a decision at one point to get into municipal sewer and municipal water and charge for it. And the city made a decision downtown to get into municipal parking. And that's the answer downtown. The answer downtown is we need to produce parking in structured parking facilities and charge for them.
Jim?
I have some questions for Mr. Shagnon.
They relate to the GPI study?
They're just what you started off with, but yeah, some of it's related to GPI. But I just want to confirm, this project will have 40 units, correct? It'll have 84 bedrooms,
Yes.
and your demand study showed you only need 28 spaces?
So the GPI study,
Yeah,
I believe that was the number they
okay, and
came
you're
up.
providing 21,
Correct.
okay,
And that was based on the ITE
right.
trip generation for urban core buildings in the urban core.
Now, speaking of ITE, I see that what they describe as a dense, multi-use urban setting, a unit would only need 0.28 spaces. That's what? I'm
Sure, I would have probably
Okay, so can you
come
describe,
across that
could
number.
you just describe generally what a dense urban use setting is?
I didn't write the ITE manual.
I know, but I'm just curious, is it,
The downtown of Portsmouth is certainly a dense core when compared to the rest of the city.
okay, so would would you say that downtown Manhattan is a dense, multi-use urban setting?
I'm not going to, I mean,
The IT, I can speak to the IT a little bit. Downtown Manhattan would be dense urban, but it'd also be close to transit. That's another checkbox in the ITE criteria, it'd be close to rail transit.
So would the same, I'm just trying to compare what ITE, what you're comparing here. So if I was in downtown Manhattan with an apartment, would I use 0.8 spaces per unit?
so we're not talking about doing a trip generation for that or a parking calculation. We're talking
I'm just
about-
trying to compare. You
We're
know
trying
what
to-
I'm getting at? I'm
I
trying
think
to
that
understand
what the chairman
the
is
demand.
saying is that the nature of transportation and parking demand is proportionally adjustable based on where you are.
Right, and that's
State
what I'm
of
trying to understand.
Massachusetts
Would you
has
use
parking
this-
demands.
Would you use
One at a
0.28
time, one at a
Manhattan?
time.
Can I finish?
Yeah, one at a time, please. Just, you're next, hang on. If you, go ahead, finish, John.
So there are communities that are adopting parking demands that are relatable to the infrastructure that's available. Cities in Massachusetts that, I don't know if you'd consider Cambridge, Massachusetts, dense urban core, but if you have a development that is within a certain distance to a train stop, you need 0 parking. And then as you go out further away, you need more parking and more parking. So the concept is that the availability of a transportation network. Now, we could say the same thing for Portsmouth, that this facility is close to a parking garage. A parking garage is so convenient that there would be a tendency for people who would want to rent here because it's so close. It's a lot easier to use the parking garage than being 10 blocks away. Would you agree?
I'm just trying to, in my mind, understand whether 0.28 spaces per unit is a reasonable estimate in Portsmouth. That's what I'm trying to get
So
here.
the GPI report uses that figure, correct?
Yeah, and for what they
And-
describe as a dense, multi-use urban setting,
Mm-hmm.
which to me could be a lot of things. Could be downtown Manhattan, could be Boston. And see, I'm trying to compare the two.
Sure. So I'm not going to speak for Rebecca Brown, who prepared that study and came up with that number, thought that number was appropriate, but she used her professional judgment, and so I would have to say, in her professional opinion, she thought that number was appropriate.
Because as you can imagine, it's very important, because in December, we had developers, Eastern Development, who do work around the nation for the Christmas tree development. And in absence of other information, their default parking demand is 1 space per bedroom.
So you're talking about a development, a Durgan Square? No, the Christmas tree shops?
Christmas tree shops.
Yeah. That is not comparatively,
Right.
that's suburbia compared to downtown Portsmouth.
Well, I'm just
Urban
saying
core
default. I'm
versus,
just saying what they said.
the
you know.
outlying,
Just
I
one
don't
other
think-
clarification that may help both of you. There's 3 options
Mm-hmm.
under the ITE. I happen to subscribe to it, too.
Yeah.
The first is suburban, which would be Christmas tree shops. The second is dense urban, dense mixed-use urban, and the third is dense mixed-use urban with rail. Those are only 3 options for all of America. So, out of the 3, downtown Portsmouth, I would pick what she picked, the same one, the middle one.
Comparing Portsmouth to downtown Manhattan,
They happen to be the same. What happens when you make the selection, the next click, you can get a description that's part of what I just explained that wasn't provided. It's not necessary. It's more for the user of the data. Because the ITE it's a database. It's not a standard. It's a database. It's a collection of studies that engineers like the applicant's engineer have submitted to the ITE on a pro bono basis so that the ITE can gather this information. There's a range of values. And that lowest value of parking, and I've got other questions about this whole topic, but to answer this, that lowest one you're quoting, Jim, is for a 1-bedroom in, basically a studio apartment in the urban setting without rail.
right.
They had a higher number, I think it's 0.93 or something for the 2 bedrooms.
I'm just having a hard time grasping of 4 units in Portsmouth only providing 1 parking space.
I understand that.
So that's why I'm trying to get to the bottom.
I understand that too.
I'm done, so I have all I need.
No other questions of John?
it may or may not be germane. As Mark said, things changed over time. 155 or 55 Congress was, I think is it 60 units? Right next door. It was 20 years ago, and it had 0 parking, and it was allowed to be built. So I don't think it changed the complexity, it didn't change downtown Portsmouth, but you only have to look next door to see that it's developing an urban core setting where parking is not provided on the lot.
Andrew, did you have your hand up?
I had a question pertaining to the Fleet Street reconstruction redevelopment. Where do we stand on that? I know it was like in the preliminary design and idea process.
You're talking about the condition?
No, I'm not talking to you, sorry.
What status that is?
The Fleet Street redevelopment?
Yeah.
I think the earliest is construction season of '27, could be later.
Oh, okay.
John, you mentioned for the trip generation, they looked at existing uses, which is normal, and then deduct that from the projecting forward for the new uses. There's some, even though it's not required in terms of actual usage of parking in that part of town, the office use, when it was bustling, which it was at one point recently, with the restaurant and the other thing, did you do a calculation or comparison with how many parking spaces are actually likely being used before the conversion versus what will be needed after the conversion?
I'd have to look at the study. I did not prepare the study. Rebecca Brown did.
Does anybody else?
Give me a minute, I can go look at the study and try to come up with that.
Okay, I've got a question for Mark that maybe you could do that well.
Yep.
The cover letter talks about the two properties being considered as one project. Can you explain, because you've now separated the buildings, are they just two projects side by side, or is there a reason you would like to consider them as one project?
Well, our desire all along has been clear. We prefer to merge and combine the lots and have them as one project inside buildings. From the outside perspective, they're going to be and appear as one because we're developing it all, where Haven Court and everything goes through both of them. So from the outside of the buildings, they're going to look like one. Until or if we can get a ability to merge those lots and not have a zoning problem, and until we can get an ability to do co-living, which we desire to do, we're just taking the best path we can in zoning that's zoning provided by right. And so they're separate buildings. They don't have to be separated by any meaningful distance. They just can't be a common firewall. Put a piece of paper through them. But we have to keep them separate along the common lot line to cure, from what staff had indicated, combining them along that lot line. Inevitably, we're hoping definitions change. We're hoping things materialize that, just like co-living, that would come back. But it's a whole block, and it has to go forward. And right now, we're just going forward with what we can by your zoning ordinances.
You used the word variance several times and hardship, which the two are linked, and unfortunately they don't come to this board, as you well know. The board may remember I've been lobbying to getting parking out of zoning. Here's a good reason why we might want to think about that again, because there's more flexibility if it's in site plan, where most municipalities have placed it in recent years. Philosophically, I completely agree with the applicant, and I do think it should be a municipal park. That's why I suggested adding the new additional parking garage to the CIP recently. But we don't have it yet, and we have the zoning ordinance that we have tonight. That's why I've asked John to do what he's doing, to see if there's some additional rationale there. Conditional use permit is our only relief valve that we have here under our zoning. So the questions that have been raised, I think, are valid ones. We've had complaints or letters from abutters I'm sure you've seen. I've had people stop me on the street, love the project, where are they going to park? I think it comes from a lot of people who don't live downtown like I do. They don't understand how the downtown works, like Joe does as well, another downtown resident. But again, we have our zoning ordinance that we're kind of stuck with a little bit. So I'm trying to figure a way, if there's a way that we can have a good rationale under the CUP criteria. Are you, the building separation that was mentioned that is perhaps paper thin, and John said it was hard to see, did you change the plans, or are you just saying that it is going to be a separation so they don't touch? They just won't touch? Okay. So it may not be visible on the plans. Were you able to find something?
So the traffic work that Rebecca Brown did, she went through trip generation, but she did not go and talk about parking demand existing versus proposed. But just looking at the trip generation, the office trips based on the existing office space, 248 daily trips. And the residential trips proposed are 36. So
Okay.
that's a significant reduction in the trips that go there.
Just a side note, when we calculate architecturally per the building codes, life safety codes, how many people are in the buildings, for office, it's calculated at 100 square feet per person for office, and it's 200 square feet per person for residential. By those calculations, we have half as many people in these buildings, half as many cars.
Those are both very helpful to me.
Marie Bodie, McNabb Properties. I just also wanted to say, I'm sure Karen, city manager, knows that in other areas where we're talking office versus residential, in an office or retail environment, it's typically in most municipalities 4 parking spaces per 1,000. So in my rough calculation, if we were maintaining JJ Newbury or coming forward to rebuild that property in a traditional market, we would be having to provide up to 176 parking spaces. So it's obviously much less in the residential use. And then like 4 per 1,000 and 6 per 1,000 is a typical, as is used in other markets. Thank you.
So, yes, Beth?
Just to try to help you a little bit in the CUP criteria, especially for parking, because things that we do look at is all of the bicycle parking that is being provided. There's a bus stop really close by. There's a parking garage really close by. All of those things add into the CUP analysis to say whether or not there is adequate parking for people that are going to be living in the urban core.
Well, just so that folks understand, maybe you do already, the trips, this daily trips you were quoting, John. So the daily trip reduction from a considerably higher number to a considerably lower number for this proposal, that does directly relate to parking. And for an office use, as we all know, office uses typically have inbound trips in the morning and outbound trips in the evening. They still do, even after COVID. It's not like some uses which have like a convenience store that has in and out traffic all day long, which is a different thing. Residential is also typically more evening peak when office use is less. So there's that. But Jim, did you have?
Well, it's just, do you think, Mr. Chair, that a commercial parking space is synonymous to a residential parking space?
No.
As far as time or use or
Well, it depends on
behavior?
it depends on the use, but there's some overlap at the peak period with office use and residential in the evening.
So when we've been presented with all this data, how, there'd be so much more parking demand under, if it was stayed JJ Newberry's, is it really applicable? Are you comparing apples with oranges?
I don't think so. I'm still thinking out loud with a lot of this and trying to find a way, as I said earlier. I'm very cognizant of the fact that we're currently at 95% plus occupancy of the downtown parking. That's over where you want to be. That's considered more than full. That's another reason why the city needs to construct another parking garage. I do not want private landowners building parking in the downtown. That's very bad public policy. there's a whole shared parking analysis. It's in our zoning ordinance. The applicant hasn't done it, but there's such a great difference between, John, could you quote those numbers again? Sorry, I didn't write them down.
No problem, I have them right here, 248 office trips and 36 residential.
Okay. Oh, 15%.
So
Yes, Andrew.
my maybe not articulated point earlier.
Microphone.
My non-articulated point earlier was really to what Jim is asking. And while it's not fair to ask an economical question in sense of cost that you can charge or incorporate into a lease, it is about the expectation of that parking space. So when leasing office space downtown, if there is none assigned, the office tenant could still feasibly convince themselves that it is worth it to lease that office space. When it is an apartment building or an apartment unit, that tenant has a maybe higher expectation or greater demand on the surrounding parking area because it is a permanent fixture of their life, that is where they reside, that is where their life revolves around. And so that was my point earlier. It's not so much the dollar for dollar value or tax burden or non-tax burden, but so much the expectation of that is the first question that is coming up. And when it is also the first headline that you see or first comment that you see or first public comment that you see, it is hard to ignore. And so while I really quite like the project, I understand the logic of not wanting to destroy a historic building, it is very hard to overcome the burden of the parking as it is an expectation or as it is so expectedly drawn into the living arrangement. And so that is something that I'm toggling between.
Would the applicant consider approval on one of the projects? And, or are you insisting on applicant approval or whatever for both tonight?
Yeah, I'm looking for both.
Okay.
You know, I also think that it's in the spirit of things that we also should consider that I'm one of the largest private owners of parking spaces downtown. I have almost 200 spaces downtown. And do you know how many residential units I have? 7.
I was going to say 0.
So right now, I have almost 200 spaces that I lease and contribute to the broader market. It's not that I don't contribute to parking. I do it when I can. I have many lots downtown. It's why I built so many underground, 2 stories under Hearth, and that project didn't require any. So I think it's important to also look at that, that we take parking serious and we help with solutions by doing that. And it's an interesting network that happens behind the scenes on where people park through our spaces and through other ones. That's why it just works its way out. But I think it is important to note that that net right now on what you require for parking residential downtown. I'm someone who's net positive on your parking ordinances downtown.
Well, in response to that, I can say that my feelings, and I think several of the board members' feelings, are based on the quality of the application. We appreciate your other projects, but this application is a quality application. You're proposing some very significant good things. From a parking perspective, I view the parking demand with these large, expensive units as being higher than for co-living, which is the reverse of the earlier discussion, but we're not at co-living tonight.
I just want to elaborate on some of the comments that Andrew had made, and I appreciate his question, and it's a real question on the street, and it's a question before us in letters from abutters and other people downtown. It's not a question that we are ignoring. we're actually explaining the answer to the question tonight. I think we're giving a very logical explanation to why it's different, why it's unique. And this project would, short of converting JJ Newbury into a parking garage itself in its entirety, this project, and no single project downtown, is going to take a significant chunk out of the answer to anyone's concerns with parking downtown, however severe they might think they are. But I think from the data that's been presented, especially when you consider the 248 existing daily trips to what's there right now versus the 36, that gives me more comfort, for sure. And the fact that, I won't repeat everything I said last time, but we just don't want this many cars to drive our design decisions in the core of downtown. It's a very unique, different situation to the rest of the city.
Yes, Paul?
I don't have a question for the applicant, but I am looking forward to discussing this further with the board after we hear from the public.
Right. It's about time for the public hearing, I think, unless any have any questions of the applicant. Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. Is anybody here or on Zoom that wishes to speak to, for, or against this application? Please step up to the podium, name and address for the record.
Hi, my name is Isabella Romero. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm 23 years old. I went to Dondero Elementary School, and my mom owns a house on Taft, so in Elm Park. I went to Dondero Elementary School, I went to Portsmouth Middle School, and I went to Portsmouth High School. So I've lived here pretty much my whole life, other than the 5 years that I was away when I was in college and working somewhere else. So I just wanted to provide like a broader narrative as to what this kind of project would bring for residential opportunity for Portsmouth, and why I support it and why I think it's really necessary. You know, when I moved back in January of last year, so about a year ago, I had to move in with my mom, and we lived with her for 6 months, and that's not a luxury that a lot of other people have. So I think that building more, hopefully, co-living units would be really helpful, and taking into consideration as well, like, I do understand the whole parking situation, but I personally believe that we should be thinking about the homes and units that we can provide for people rather than the parking spaces that we can provide for cars. And yeah, I do really think that we're at such a deficit of housing here, and I've been watching for the past 5-10 years. I have lots of friends that I grew up with, obviously, in Portsmouth, who no longer live here, can't afford to live here. So speaking to, again, that broader narrative, I know we were just in the details a lot of it, so I do understand that. But allowing the conditional parking permit, I think, would help this project go forward, provide more units, provide more people with housing. And I have a lot of friends, as I said, who can't afford to live here, and don't see themselves living here. Even if they do work here, I know a lot of people who work in Portsmouth but live in Dover, and they would rather be able to walk to work than to have a car. So, and I live on Islington Street, so we live in a fourplex, and we don't have any parking spaces that are allotted to us. We just use the public parking that's provided, and we can always find a spot. So that's not really an issue that we've found. So that's just, I think, something important to consider from constituents who are asking for more housing and not more parking for cars. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Ellie Coakley. I live at 425 Islington Street. along with Ms. Romero. I do just want to, again, echo what Isabella was saying. As far as the housing crisis that Portsmouth faces, according to the 2022 study released by the Portsmouth Housing Authority, our vacancy rates here in Portsmouth are at a shocking 1.86%. For folks who are in the leasing business, that's a very, very low number, where a 4 to 6, even 8% vacancy rate is a healthy market showing a balanced supply and demand. We are far below that. Median rents have skyrocketed here in Portsmouth as well. Between 2014 and 2021, again, this is citing the 2022 Portsmouth Housing Authority study, rents increased by 118%. So I would like to speak in support of this development on behalf of McNabb. We really need to focus on where people are going to live as opposed to cars. With 3 parking garages that exist downtown, that provides a start. I know that logistics, as we've discussed tonight, are very important. But in a city like ours, urban density and a vibrant downtown development cannot coexist with a commitment to suburban-style sprawl. We have to rethink how we're using that valuable, dense land. As we saw with the recent Islington Street improvements to pedestrian traffic, crosswalks, sidewalks, and we saw whenever the construction was happening, businesses down on Islington Street were severely hurt by a lack of foot traffic. But now with walking space and pedestrian access, it's improving the economics for our local businesses. While there is concern about parking, we have an even greater need for housing that is affordable and close to where people work, especially young people in the retail and service industries. So thank you so much for your time. I do support this development and hope that we can add more space downtown in the heart of our community for the people who live and work in Portsmouth so they don't have to go to other places like Dover or move out of the state altogether. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have people on Zoom.
Marcio, go ahead.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, thank you, members of the Planning Board. My name is Marcio Von Eulen. I live here in Portsmouth on 303 Thaxter Road. I'm calling in support of the proposal. I'm motivated by personal experience. I myself lived in a co-living home for 4 years after college in an expensive place. I had a job as a bartender, actually, and I would not have been able to afford to live in that neighborhood and walk to my job. But because of the co-living place that existed that I was able to live in, I did walk to my job. I did not have a car for many, many years. I biked everywhere. I loved it. I made tons of friends on the street. And I think that kind of living just makes sense. And when I think about Portsmouth and downtown Portsmouth specifically, I think it's a great place for co-living. I think the future versions of me who want to work in Portsmouth and live in Portsmouth should be able to find a place to live downtown in Portsmouth where they don't need a car. And that's because of, and that's why I support this project. I don't think the lack of required parking should be a blocker. I also don't think downtown Portsmouth has a parking shortage. Our downtown is charming and walkable because it was built for people and not for cars. The lack of conforming parking on every lot is not a bug, it's a feature. And I know I'm not alone here, as we've already heard, so please know that many members of our community are not asking for more parking, they're asking for more housing, and thus please approve this project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin, go ahead.
Hi, good evening. This is Robin Husledge, and I live at 27 Rock Street. I'm speaking tonight about number 1 and 15 Congress Street development proposal that's before you tonight. I'm not speaking to the co-living proposal. I like a lot of what is being proposed for this project. However, I'm not in favor of the request for a parking CUP to allow 21 parking spots where 53 are required. If there are 40 units with 84 bedrooms, more than likely there's going to be at least 84 cars for the people living in these units. And where are all the guests visiting these 40 units going to park also? I'm sorry, but providing 36 bicycle parking spaces just won't make up for the deficit of the needed 32 to 63 car parking spaces. These big developer parking CUP requests, which continue being approved and allowing them to build these residential units without providing the necessary parking, is why the city is now looking at needing to build a third parking garage. Until the city provides effective and efficient public transportation that works for the city of Portsmouth community, people will need a place to park. Parking in downtown is a nightmare as it is. And who will be responsible for the lion's share of the cost of building this new garage? Since the tax burden continues to shift increasingly to taxpayers like me who live in a house rather than big commercial buildings, I'm saying no. I no longer want to pay to provide parking for these big developments. It's time for them to pay their fair share and contribute to the huge cost of these parking garages or transportation. I'm asking for you not to increase my tax burden by denying this developer's request for a parking CUP, and instead come up with a way for the developers requesting parking CUPs to pay for the parking they don't provide in a significant way to alleviate the burden that now sits disproportionately with homeowners like me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Logan Roy?
Good evening. My name is Logan Roy. I live at 233 Hillside Drive. I'm also here to speak regarding the proposed plan on Congress Street. I'm here in support of the plan. I live in the city of Portsmouth. I walk, I bike, I run, and yes, sometimes drive downtown. I've always been able to find a parking spot pretty easily. On New Year's Eve, I parked on the first floor of the parking garage at around 8:30 p.m. So I think we have plenty of parking. One thing we don't have plenty of is housing. As some of the previous members of the public mentioned, there's been, I think, feedback through Portsmouth Listens, through public discourse, showing a massive demand for housing. As the previous commenter mentioned, our skyrocketing housing prices are showing the demand for housing that far exceeds the supply. So I'm in favor of anything that brings more housing to the city of Portsmouth. I know the co-living idea isn't up for discussion tonight, but I would encourage the board and the developer to do what they can to make that a reality as well. Some members of the board mentioned that the first comment they see is about parking, and that it's a concern for the community. I would agree, but I think a larger concern is housing. And finally, I'd like to echo, I think, what Marcio said about a personal example. I know people are having trouble kind of wrapping their heads around how this housing proposal would work, who wouldn't have a car. When I first moved to Portsmouth in 2015, I was a junior officer on the USS Annapolis. I'd never heard of Portsmouth before. I got assigned to the shipyard. I walked, biked, ran to work from South Street almost every day unless it got too cold in the winter. Many of the other officers and sailors I served with came here without a car or had a car at another house in Groton, Connecticut, or in San Diego. And indeed, when I had to move, my wife stayed back here for a year. I took the car with me, and she biked to her job at Thermo Fisher. So there's plenty of people in the area who want a place to live, who need a place to live, and can figure something out without a place to park. So, we need more apartments, we need more condos, we need single-family homes with driveways and garages, but we also need creative ways to make the city home for people whose lives might be a little more flexible. So I enjoy living in Portsmouth. I want people to have that opportunity, and I would encourage the board to approve the conditional use permit and expand our housing options. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other hands have been raised. If you'd like to speak, raise your hand.
Or if anybody in the room wants to speak.
No other hands.
I'll ask if there are any second round speakers, just for the sake of asking, but I assume everybody's said their piece. Anybody on Zoom? Nobody here wishes to speak to for or against this application. I'm going to close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed. Yes, Joe.
Could I just ask the city manager to explain in a bit more detail the idea that parking garage, how they impact the taxpayer?
Right. I'm glad we have the opportunity to clear this up. So the way that the city has paid for parking garages is to bond for the construction and utilize and the debt service to pay off the bonds comes exclusively from the parking fund. It does not come from the taxpayers. It comes from the ratepayers, the people who pay to use the parking. And our studies have shown that somewhere in the vicinity of 96% of people who pay for parking in the downtown do so are non-residents. So it is a common misconception that this cost would be borne by the taxpayers. It would not. And to the point I think Mr. McNabb made, the city made a conscious decision long ago to support parking as an enterprise, which supports the uses in the downtown. And this is a good example of a project that will rely on that enterprise that was created for such a purpose.
I also just wanted to speak a little bit more about the idea of lot size, building size, and the reasons why we see that language in our zoning today. I remember being part of that language back when Nick Cracknell was here, and after the Port Walk developments of new construction in our core, the idea of maximum size footprints was a really hot topic. And I can tell you because I was part of those discussions, it was not having to, and Counselor as well, those discussions did not have to do with existing buildings. They had all to do with the idea and the fear of very large box buildings completely taking over downtown. So I think we're unfair. I think this project is caught almost in an unfair light with that language, because that language was not drawn intending to limit historic buildings that exist in the core.
Just to clarify that, it's not an issue. If the buildings aren't touching, then we have a pre-existing non-conforming J.J. Newberry's building. We have another building that's okay because we've approved it already once before. Correct, Peter?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So that is not an issue tonight. Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I've heard this evening is the applicant cannot provide the minimum required number of parking spaces either within the project or immediately adjacent. And that's a Portsmouth downtown problem. What the applicant has done is move the surface parking that provides 18 spaces now below grade, add a few spaces to it with a car elevator, which would be less impactful than having ramps going in and out and so forth. So that is I'm sure a costly and challenging solution to, maintain what's there now and add to it for tenants. And while none of this is perfect, it shows a strong willingness to address this parking problem as best they can. Which brings me to the CUP, and looking in our zoning ordinance, there's language in here that I'm reading that the planning board may grant the conditional use permit, if. And one of the things that jumped right out at me, the first one is the parking demand analysis shall be reviewed by TAC, and prior to submission to the planning board, demonstrating that it's sufficient. But I didn't see that in the package, that TAC reviewed it and recommended.
They reviewed the whole file. It's in there.
But it wasn't in what was provided to me.
They did, didn't
Yeah.
It just said something about the footprint they spoke to, but not.
Well, they did, they reviewed the whole, this
The whole application.
application, including the parking CP. I mean,
And they had no concerns with that,
Not with the parking.
with the demand analysis that was presented.
Right.
Okay. And I'm looking for, how am I going to support this CUP? 10.1112.142 goes on and so on and so on. There are more requirements of this board to be able to approve this CUP. The last one, the minimum number requested, we have discretion over, that's not going to happen. The maximum number requested, that's not going to happen, but, how do we, I guess at this point, rationalize approving this CUP? Is what I'm looking for from the board to help me with.
Well, the technical number they're looking for is 21?
21.
21 spaces?
Well, if you view it as a total project, the 21 replaces 19. So there's really no parking being applied compared to what existed previously if you look at it as two combined projects.
And to continue that logic, I'm sorry, and to continue
It's
that
very comfortable
logic,
the other way. I know, I understand.
we're reducing the parking impact to the entire development with this change of use. And the trip generation is dramatically less. I mean, that is how we explain it. It's not perfect, but it's real.
That's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
Yes, Jim.
To continue to what Paul was saying about the demand analysis, TAC may not have a problem with it, but I have a big problem with how it was performed because I'm still trying to wrap my head around how four units are going to share one space in downtown Portsmouth. That just is not happening. And if I could, I'd like to read a couple sentences from Perry Silverstein. In the 30 years leasing downtown, I have never had someone living in any of my apartments without a car. Any argument made by Mr. McNabb that his proposed project of high-end residents and businesses will not have cars is absurd. I have to agree. I think there's going to be 84 bedrooms in this project. There'll be 84 adults, and each one will have a car. And so I think the projected deficit is not 7 spaces, but 66. So obviously, there's a wide discrepancy here, and that's what my analysis shows.
Bill?
I did go back to look at the master plan in the hope that there would be some inkling there, either as to kind of a vision as to what should happen in the immediate downtown area in terms of housing, or and the only mention that I found anywhere that addressed this even tangentially was an acknowledgement of the conflict between the need for cars and the other requirements of the downtown area. So the point is really that the master plan's silent on whether there should be more housing in the immediate downtown area, and it's silent on solving a problem with parking in the downtown area. I was hopeful, and I didn't understand the purpose of the Market Square master plan effort, but I've watched the videos a couple times, and I don't find anything there that helps me understand what we should be doing in the Market Square area. Admittedly, that project is really mostly about pedestrian activity and traffic flow, but there's no clue there that I could find that would make me think that this is anything that we really thought about. So it's kind of a one-off, and it's a big one-off if we're looking for what I think is really 50 incremental demand without any solution for any parking for it.
Well, just as it constrains us by having to work within the CUP, we have to stay constrained by the criteria in our ordinance. So if you feel it really needs 84 parking spaces, you may feel that, but that's not something that's written in our regulations. So, and there's nothing that's been submitted that would support that other than the suburban project that is a different context. So we have to be careful about that and stay within what we have to work with. Did you have your hand up, Beth? I thought it was
I
Andrew.
have things to say, but I was letting everyone else have
Okay.
their piece. Or do we want to start motions so that we can systematically talk about it after a motion?
Looks like you've got your way, yeah.
I will try to start at the beginning this time and not halfway through. I'd like to make a motion that we vote to find the site plan application meets the requirements set forth in Site Plan Regulations, Section 2.9 Evaluation Criteria, and adopt the findings of fact as presented.
Second.
Discussion.
So you're saying that the lot buildings situation is resolved?
Because they're not touching.
Okay, because I saw.
That was option 2.
Okay.
Findings of fact.
Inside
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
I will continue on to make a motion that we vote to grant site plan approval with the following conditions, in addition to the original conditions of approval stated in the letter of decision dated February 16th, 2023, and that's 2.1 through 2.4.
Second.
Discussion.
While I will see Mr. Hewitt's point of being at a deficit of some parking spaces, I
It's a
have
site
site plan.
It's a site plan. We haven't gotten to the conditional use permit for parking yet.
It possible, but go ahead.
I just didn't want you to waste your breath if you had something you'd really like to talk about on site plan instead.
I'm excited to talk about it all. Go ahead.
So you're going to wait?
Yes.
Okay. Site plan? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
I will now continue on to vote to find that the conditional use permit application meets the requirements set forth in section 10.1112.14 of the ordinance and adopt the findings of fact as presented.
Second.
Discussion.
While I can certainly see Mr. Hewitt's points, I have arrived at some comfort and compromise in the fact of this project's proximity to a parking garage, 2 of them at that point, and on top of that, it's urban living. People walk into an apartment with somewhat expectation of not having parking, and so while I never hope to further perpetuate a problem like parking, I would agree that it's a good opportunity to reuse and further retrofit these buildings into what I think will be a nice continuation of Commercial Alley or Chestnut Street, and I think it can be a great contribution overall.
I'm going to save my comments to the next one.
Bill?
This really represents a decision to ignore the requirements in the code. It's not a 2 or 3 judgmental thing. It's a quantum decision not to require parking for a residential area or for a residential project in an area that requires it. I worry about the precedent of that. I don't know what the implications of the precedent are. I don't know how many other pieces of property or developers would like to do something and face an equal problem that they can't retrofit their property economically or aesthetically. So the problem is very real in the way the city is structured and organized, but the law passed by the city council says 53, and I have a hard time when my understanding of reading the parking report says the real answer is 0 when you take the 21 as replacing 20. So to say, yes, we approve the CUP says we really are by precedent, eliminating the requirement for parking in residential areas downtown.
Joe, you had your finger up?
Yeah, I just want to, I want to be clear that I appreciate the questions surrounding the parking here. I would be consistent with this decision on any development of this scale in the center, in the core center of the city. I would not apply the same ideas to new construction on a greenfield site that wasn't, in the core. And I'm not being fooled by the idea that that there won't be any cars. I'm being realistic that the core can absorb it, and the core is the downtown is, this project is asking less of what it's asking now. So I think that it's a unique situation, but I would be consistent with any project in the core to not. I'll say it again, that in order to comply, you'd have to convert J.J. Newberry's into a parking garage and build a garage on the Congress Street site. And I just know that as a community, we don't want that. We don't want that. This is why I'm so comfortable with this project as being the right ask for the site.
Bill?
We do have two other significant size projects that are in some state of approval or consideration by us that fall within the downtown area that have a parking requirement attached. And it's not hard to, think of at least one other that will come before us in the next year that will have a significant potential for downtown parking. And I don't know how I could differentiate this in my mind from any of those others where we have required parking or where we might in the future.
Yes, Jim.
Well, one thing I think is a little dangerous assumption is that we're just assuming that all these people are going to use a parking garage. Well, parking garages cost money. And maybe some of these people don't want to spend money. They'll be parking in residential areas near downtown. Again, putting a burden outside where it's supposed to be. So that's a factor that I don't think we can overlook either.
To Joe's point, yes, no one wants to see the Newberry building become a parking garage, but nonetheless, it's not so much that it's going to go that route, but more so the sheer number of units, the residential units that are being placed here, and therefore contributing to the number of parking spaces that we're talking about. And so maybe it is just a number of volume of residential units rather than volume of parking spaces that we are misperceiving. And I would agree with Mr. Bowen's points as well. It's going to set an ugly precedent.
Just on the precedent issue, it's very hard to actually set a precedent on an application like this. Look at the specifics of this application, all of them, with the Haven Court, the adjacent streets, the existing use, the existing non-conforming size of the existing use that's being converted from office and restaurant into what it's being converted to. If you made a list of all the factors that make this project what it is, it's unique. It's not precedent setting. A conditional use permit is a means of relief under our ordinance. It's a discretionary authority that the council has given this board. So I appreciate Jim Hewitt's concerns and I appreciate your concerns. They're valid concerns. I may not agree with them, but I appreciate them and I understand why you would have those concerns. I don't like to talk about personal living thing, but my building that I live in with 6 residential units, we have no parking. And I live with my adult son, we have one vehicle. My neighbors are all adults and they each have one vehicle. So, and there's more than one person in each unit. So is it but that's only 6 units. I'm not saying that's how things apply throughout the downtown, but it's different than Richards Avenue where I used to live. I can tell you that. That's not that far away, but it's a very different context. So Paul, and then I think
We're
Beth
still
wants
on
the last
findings of
word.
fact, so
Oh, okay.
I still have a whole nother motion to make.
All right.
I was kind of hoping we'd
Yeah,
move
we
on
get,
from
sorry,
findings of
I
fact.
got dragged off.
Just waiting for the vote.
Are we ready for a vote?
So we're saying that there's evidence-based measures that make 21 spaces adequate and appropriate for this project,
This motion right now is for findings of fact.
which would be the
Paul's getting it.
evidence-based
Just
measures.
the findings of fact are complete. They've given us all the information that we need, and we don't disagree with or find any issues with them.
Should we consider adding the data that Mr. Shagnon provided in terms of the trip generation difference between?
Sure.
It's
So
findings of
you want
fact.
me to do amended as, I can change the motion to be as amended with office trips at,
The existing office trips, right?
existing office trips at 248 per day,
Yep.
and residential use would be 36
The
per
second,
day.
the second agrees.
Okay, findings of
Those numbers
fact
down.
as amended. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, now I'd like to make the motion that we vote to grant the conditional use permit as presented.
Second.
And I'd like to speak.
Please do.
I agree with a lot of things that have been said. I think that we do have I don't think we have a parking issue, but we have parking that we have to manage. Parking, as the city manager has put out, makes the city a lot of money. I think if you look at the most recent numbers, I remember it was over 10 million in a year. And we already know from some of the things that the city manager said that most of that actually doesn't come from our residents. And all of our parking structures are funded through our parking revenues. On top of every year, 2.5 million is put in the general fund, which helps lower the tax rate for homeowners. So we should appreciate the municipal parking garages and the amount of money that they help generate in the city. So that's one of my soapbox issues. Another one is I'm sitting here looking at a picture of the application at page 534 of our package, and the top floor of that parking garage doesn't have a single car on it. Not a single car is parked on the whole top floor in that aerial view. So I'm trying to have a hard time imagining that we do have a parking, or going to have a parking problem when we have that many empty parking spaces sitting there looking at me in the face right now. And if we had an overflow all the time, then we have events that cause issues and we have to work through those, but those are kind of one-off things and times that it's a problem across the city. As far as bleed into residential neighborhoods, we are very close. We're summing up the final reports. We're going to work towards having a really good solution for neighborhoods that surround the downtown. I happen to live in one of them. I live off Islington Street. I understand how the bleed. And it's not from the residents that live in Portsmouth that's the problem. It's the people from out of state, at work downtown. It's all of those people that are causing that issue. And we have an idea of how we're going to be able to fix that, and I think it's really going to work. Since we haven't rolled it out yet, I won't tell you, but it's coming. We're also, as the city, taking looks at things like microtransit. As the chair of the Rockingham Planning Commission, I've made it my mission to keep pushing for more regional transportation so that we have more public transportation through the bus service. I mean, I'll probably never get anything beyond that, but that is our hope, is that we can get the state to help fund that. There are a lot of solutions out there, and I feel like I went into town with my car last night because I just left a meeting and my husband wanted dinner, and there were like 5 parking spaces open on Pleasant Street. I mean, there are sometimes it's not a parking problem. It's just when we're overwhelmed with people as a whole that are working downtown. So I think the symbiotic relationship between what was office space taking up probably way more parking to what now would be residential, which might be taking less parking, I think it's a symbiotic swap that we will actually find better use of our parking garage versus worse use. So I think I hit every point I wanted to say, but I'll get off my soapbox now.
Anybody else?
I'll just agree with everything she just said. I believe it. I believe all of that is. I believe all of that is true, and I agree.
Repeat it all.
No.
Yes, Bill.
As a general question, in this specific property, would one expect housing with three-bedroom units or three-bedroom units to generate less parking demand than use of that space for offices? Is that a...
I think you heard the architects give us the space comparison.
It's half.
And that is, for those who understand these things, that's an accurate comment?
I believe so.
Bodies per square foot.
I'll make a comparison. I happen to be the president of a condo association that's all businesses. And we go through a lot of parking, right? We use a lot of parking because we not only need parking for our employees, but we also need parking for all our visitors. So you're adding on top of that, and that's why the parking demand for an office during those peak times of daytime are an issue that way. But then you have businesses like realtors who have people coming in even on weekends, and sometimes they can come in multiple cars. So I truly do believe that based off of being a business owner and a resident, that it is the businesses and offices that will actually create way more parking than actual residents that live here.
We're ready for a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I mean, no. Yes to no.
And no.
We have two noes and
6 yeses.
6 yeses. Motion carries.
Okay, I don't think we have more, right? I didn't miss any, did I? Oh, I figured it.
We're done with that, right?
We move on to zoning.
FYI, we're probably going to have a conversation about the co-living zoning amendment next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Zoning and an extension.
Zoning amendments.
Bathroom. Bathroom break.
I guess we need a 5-minute break.
Yes, please.
I would love a 5-minute break. Yes, please.
Next.
referred from city council.
Oh, yeah.
So first is a fence, the other is related to a whole bunch of accessory uses. You want to explain it, Peter?
I thought he was looking at me. Glad he talked to you.
Right, so the first is increasing the height of fences along the side and rear lot lines from 6 feet to 8 feet.
For the record, we actually used to be 8 feet, and a previous administration put it down to 6. I kind of disagreed with it, but we did it, and we're just going back to where we've always been, which is
Always
8
were.
feet. Always were.
The next section is related to mechanical systems, HVAC units that routinely come before the zoning board of adjustment and are routinely granted. So this-
Meaning variances are routinely granted.
Right, variances are routinely granted. Since I've been here, I've only seen one that was denied, and then they came back the next month and it was granted in a different location, same setback, but just further down along the house. Otherwise, they're always granted.
And it's like 30 or something in the last couple of years, 30 of them?
Yep. So the proposal was to strike that section and then add 2 new sections under residential and institutional residence of care uses, accessory to permitted residential uses. Section .6 would allow any lot containing 1 or 2 dwelling units to construct and maintain up to one-story detached accessory structure used as a tool or storage shed, a playhouse, treehouse, or similar use, with a square foot not greater than 120 square feet. This one of these would be allowed and would not have to comply with certain zoning requirements. The only zoning requirements would be environmental protection standards, the corner lot provision, and if it's in a historic district.
No setbacks?
No setbacks, no building coverage.
Did this come up because of that treehouse thing we had a year and a half?
No, it didn't.
No.
It was the mayor. The mayor has been wanting to do this, and this was something he asked for.
This came up to.
He's from the treehouse?
No.
This could apply to tree houses.
It
Well,
could.
wasn't there a big treehouse
It
dispute?
clearly would apply to
There was.
tree houses, they're in there.
That was a big structure.
It was much bigger than 120 square feet.
I see.
This is to be in line with things that are exempt from needing a building permit. So, and then section .61 allows for swings and other playground equipment and above-ground pools and hot tubs permitted as accessory structure to single and 2-family dwellings. They would again be exempt from zoning except environmental protection standards and corner lot obstructions.
Vision obstructions.
Corner lot vision obstruction. So that had first reading at the council's meeting. They've referred it to the planning board. And they've scheduled a second reading at the February 3rd meeting. If the planning board wants to hold a public hearing on this,
We don't have to, do we?
we don't have to, but it's been the practice of the planning board to hold public hearings. It's not required per our legal department. There may be the other opinions on that, but
Just to back that
Yeah.
up, there will be a public hearing at city council at second reading. So it's not like there
That's
won't
correct.
be a public hearing. It just will be at.
Could I ask you to elaborate a bit more on where these, why the fence, why the shed?
I
why
had the same question.
Same, yeah, I want you to elaborate on Andrew's question. Like specifically the 6 feet to 8 feet for fencing. It seems very specific, and I just want to know why this is being brought before us.
I think the 8 feet, over that, you need a building permit?
that's correct.
Right. And right now, if you do over 6 feet, you need a building permit.
And the reason I ask is I know that there are situations, I can't remember the name of the road. I've had a resident nearby City Hall here on a couple blocks away a neighbor put up an 8-foot tall fence on top of a retaining wall, and it's literally, it's 12 feet high at the sidewalk, and it creates a fortress. How do you defend against situations like that? An 8-foot tall fence is very high.
Under New Hampshire law,
It's side and
a
rear.
spite fence, which is considered a nuisance, is anything over 5 feet.
Yeah. Yeah, it affects sunlight, it affects.
Anything,
That's the
so it's
actual
only
term.
side and rear that allows the 8 feet. Anything in the front is 4 feet. Right? So
That's correct, yeah.
if you're talking like a sidewalk, you can't be higher than 4 feet, right? Because
Right, if it's on the street.
it's on a street.
Well, is
We're
it above-
talking your side
is it
and
above
rear.
grade, or is it above the,
Right.
is it the fence material, or is it 8
Because
foot
the other thing
above
that happens
grade?
with an 8-foot fence, you lift it off the ground. You're up at 8.6 because there's clearance. They're not usually touching the ground. There's a few inches off the ground. I mean, if we're going to get
Exposed.
specific about, yeah. And on a sideline, you could easily be blocking, if you're up against another house. If we're saying this is without permit and without even coming to the city, you're allowed to put these fences up 8 feet tall without any, then you could literally, I guess the reason I'm asking, there's a lot more to it than just saying, sure, go up another 2 feet. I mean, I want to know where this is coming from. It seems specific, to me, I'm suspicious it seems specific to an actual application. That's what it feels like.
Have there been variance requests to go to 8 feet?
There have been.
What usually
They're usually granted if they're in the side or rear.
Okay.
So you mentioned that it was 8, was brought down to 6. Was there an issue at 8 that a previous somebody saw that was like,
I honestly, this was a decade ago, so I can't remember. I just remember the change, but I don't remember exactly why. I can tell you, at our former house, we had put up 8-foot fences because those fences make good neighbors. And in some cases, you might need that. 6 feet might not be quite enough, especially if your property sits downhill to somebody else.
If the mayor's walking by.
Right? You might want that 8 feet.
Well, you could plant arborvitae and they'll go to 20.
They can, yes, yes.
So the variances, they're not always granted, though?
I think they're more
often
likely.
granted than not.
But it's not as consistent as for the HVAC, perhaps?
Right.
Because I don't have an issue with the HVAC. I mean, that's a reason to change the zoning ordinance if you're typically and always granting variances. 8-foot high fence is pretty high. And
I just didn't realize this was an issue. I didn't understand. I didn't know this was an issue other than one or two of, but it required a zoning change, but I could be convinced. I just don't know what
The rationale was to be in line with what doesn't require a building permit.
So to your point, you just go build it.
what could possibly go wrong.
Could we amend it to say 8-foot installed at grade?
Measured off grade?
I mean, it would be measured to the top of the fence wherever. I mean, even if
Well,
it's
if I
off.
put a 2-foot high retaining wall and then an 8-foot fence on top of it, I've built 10-foot high fence.
And if your neighbor has stairs that go right down there, you might want that 10-foot high.
I could put a 6-foot retaining wall and an 8-foot fence on it. Be at 14.
Do you guys want to have a hearing on this? And the reason there's this thing, it was in the McNabb application called administrative gloss. There's a question about whether we need to have public hearings. And there's a move, I know council would like to have us not have public hearings, and some of you may not want to have public hearings.
sorry.
I think it's the responsibility of the planning board to have hearings on zoning ordinances. And that's what the city has been doing. That's administrative gloss. There's a several-year history of that. That's what that funny term means. That said, if the board doesn't want to have a hearing on it, we don't have to have a hearing on it. You can make the modification
It's a
and send it
fence.
to council the way it is. We can reject it.
It's just a fence.
I want you guys to know what you can do.
Neighbors.
Did you want to amend it, Paul?
Does this also, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but does this, are there HDC exceptions in the district? Are there exceptions to this rule or no?
I think the HGC
Not
always
for the
overwrites
fence.
it.
Right, the fences go to HDC.
Right, but is there anything in this change that states that they still go to HTC, or is that being?
Need to.
Or does it need to? Because there's no permit being applied for.
It's not here.
It's in the HDC section.
Right.
So that, as a matter of right.
Anyone putting up a fence in the HDC would have to go before the HDC.
Good,
Period.
good.
So they'd be, as a matter of right, they'd be permitted 8 feet, but they'd have to convince the HDC.
Right.
What's the board's pleasure? I personally, I don't support the second 60 and 61. It's too, it's granting too much authority in a, if this was a more rural suburban area, or if we changed it to be just in rural and suburban areas, but it's too broad, in my mind.
Where is that one?
Letting people
the
build 120
swings.
square foot sheds and tool sheds and playhouses up right on the property line. Have two side by side, either side of a property line, no permits.
That's right where it's going to go.
Well, if you build one, I'm going to build one right beside it.
Right. And that becomes,
Just put up
that
an
becomes a
8-foot fence
spite
and I want
shed.
to look at it.
I'm going to store fuel in it.
Fireworks are going to be in
Okay.
mine, so.
Oh.
Somebody want to make a motion?
I've done them all this tonight, so somebody else needs to step up.
We can continue it. People are getting tired, but let's do something with it.
Oh, fine. I'll make a motion that I don't know, do you think we should have a public hearing? So we'll have a public hearing and we'll just postpone it February 3rd. We'll continue the second reading till the next meeting.
I'll
Motion
second.
to have a hearing, second, any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?
It would be great to have examples of 8-foot fences. if we could,
Sure.
Around
Go
town.
look at 18 McDonough Street.
Yeah, I mean, that's just like really one context, and I know that there are,
But it's actually even on the retaining wall, so it'll give you an idea.
yeah.
In a small
We have a
space.
request by a one-year extension for 815 Lafayette Road.
First request, right?
First request, and they're likely going to get a building permit within the next 2 weeks, but it's going to be beyond their, otherwise it expires on the 18th, so.
Mr. Chairman, I vote to grant a one-year extension to the planning board approval of the site plan and conditional use permits for this project to January 18th, 2026.
Second?
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Congress, we just approved.
Right,
we
so
don't
there's no
do
need
anything
for
with that. We need to have a workshop about co-living, solar, Hanover change, and possibly even wetlands. Those are all things that staff's been working on. So, should we do that on our February workshop date, which is the third Thursday?
The third Thursday?
I think, isn't
Oh,
it?
you mean the
Oh, the
fourth?
fourth, I'm sorry, the fourth Thursday? I'm starting to fade too early
It's the
tonight.
20th, so it would be the 27th.
Yeah,
The
27th.
27th, yeah.
What was the February 3rd date that?
That's city
That's
council.
city council
That
meeting.
went back, but it's going to be postponed.
But as I'm looking at it, the planning board meeting's after the second city council meeting, so we're going to have to move second reading to March. 27th, you said?
27th is our,
What are we, a meeting, a work session? What am I doing?
Just on zone, work session,
Zoning work session or zoning meeting?
work session.
What time would that be at?
Well, shouldn't we start having, whatever, work session, okay.
do you want to suggest something else?
Let's start having public hearings and passing them. Let's start moving them along.
What time would the work session be?
So we'd start at 6.
Yeah, why don't we do it at 6?
Can we do all these meetings at 6?
That'd be awesome.
Shall we want to make that change?
I think it would
I-
conflict with
Should we-
housing
should
committee.
we- Yeah,
It would conflict with housing committee, but the only problem with doing things earlier is that I believe we're required to start, the meetings to have public hearings at 7 o'clock under something under the city. Am I wrong, Karen?
This is ringing a bell. We can look into this.
Because of public hearings that's why city council meetings, when they're having public meetings, can't start till 7 o'clock.
You could do your other business
Right.
before. and then
Let's put it, let's make sure we have it on the agenda for the next meeting to talk about.
To talk about.
It is I think it's either in our charter.
Yeah, I think it's
or
the charter.
I think it's in the charter, yeah. I've read it somewhere, I just can't remember where I read it. How do you like that? But right, work sessions, we can start earlier. Site walks, clearly we can do anytime, but true meetings that have public hearings, I believe, have a requirement of not starting before 7 p.m.
And the other thing, before we head out, the master plan, as you get the email from our manager, there's some contract negotiations that are getting close to finalized. I think once the contract has been executed, the planning board will start to be involved with.
Correct. They
The
will be
master plan going
among the
forward.
first stops when they come to town.
Bill, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm confused on this subject and have been for some time. The state statute on duties of the planning board has some shalls and some shoulds in it. And it has, the number one shall is, it shall be the duty of every planning board established under this regulation to prepare and amend from time to time a master plan to guide the development of the municipality. I think we all should take that as a serious obligation, if we're going to be on this board, that when the state law says we shall, that we shall. So I'd like to understand the role of the planning board and how we're going to participate in the development of the next master
Can I
plan.
take that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I heard you say, Member Bowen, that the planning board shall prepare and amend. There's nothing in that language that says procure, and that's the job of management, to procure and contract with the firm that will do the work.
Okay.
So once we have that firm under contract, this board will guide the work of that consultant, along with staff, along with the council, along with a steering committee that we will establish. But given that we have management in place here to do, among other things, procure services, that's what we're doing right now.
But going forward, it will be a product of the planning board.
Correct.
The steering committee was the only part of what you said that confuses me a little bit, but it's too late to talk about it right now.
You know, in the same way we have, we've had advisory committees or boards with citizen involvement that help guide the plans. I think there could well be an effort similar to
Part of the outreach
Yeah.
part. Okay. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.
Yay. I need to go home.